Have you ever been in a situation where someone said something hurtful or irritating, and your first instinct was to respond, explain yourself, or defend your point of view? Maybe you've tried reasoning, arguing, or even raising your voice, only to find that the conversation left you feeling drained, frustrated, or even more misunderstood. I know I have. For much of my life, I thought that speaking up was always the right thing to do. If I remained quiet, I worried that I'd be seen as weak or passive, that my thoughts and feelings would go unnoticed. But over the years, I discovered something remarkable, something that changed the way I relate to people and, ultimately, the way I live my life. I learned that silence can be the most powerful, liberating, and wise response. At 78 years old, it might seem late to have these kinds of realizations, but the truth is, life keeps teaching us lessons no matter our age. In this video, I want to share my journey to understanding the value of silence, why it's especially important as we grow older, and how choosing to pause and listen, instead of reacting impulsively, can improve your peace of mind, relationships, and overall happiness. I'll walk you through the first insights that led me to embrace silence, how I started practicing it in daily life, and the small but profound changes it created. Let's start with the first shift I made, recognizing the moments when silence is more powerful than words. For me, it began with simple awareness. I noticed that many of the conversations that left me frustrated had one thing in common: I had reacted too quickly. I had jumped in to correct, defend, or explain, thinking I needed to assert myself immediately. But when I stepped back and observed the situation without speaking, something interesting happened. The tension in the room decreased, the other person often revealed more of their perspective, and I felt calmer. Simply giving myself the space to not react, to pause and breathe, gave me a sense of control that words alone could never provide. The next insight was learning to distinguish between situations that deserve a response and those that do not. Over the years, I realized that not every comment, disagreement, or criticism requires my input. Some people are expressing their own frustrations, insecurities, or misunderstandings, and their words are more about them than about me. By taking a moment to assess the situation, I could decide, is my response going to add clarity, or is it just feeding a conflict? This small decision, to stay silent when appropriate, became a cornerstone of my new approach. It's not about avoidance or weakness, it's about wisdom and choosing your energy carefully, something that becomes increasingly important as we age. Another point that shifted my perspective was understanding the emotional energy we waste by reacting too quickly. I noticed that when I engaged in arguments or heated discussions, even if I won the conversation, I often felt exhausted afterward. My heart raced, my mind replayed every word, and I carried that tension long after the exchange ended. Silence, on the other hand, allowed me to preserve my energy, stay centered, and respond from a place of calm if necessary. It reminded me that our words are powerful, and sometimes, the absence of words is more impactful than the most eloquent argument. I also learned that silence can be a form of self-respect and boundary setting. When we feel pressured to respond, explain, or defend ourselves constantly, we are giving away our inner peace. Choosing to remain quiet can be a way of protecting your emotional well-being. It communicates strength without aggression, composure without confrontation, and dignity without needing approval. This was especially valuable for me as I navigated family gatherings, social interactions, or situations with people who thrived on conflict. Over time, silence became not a retreat, but a conscious choice to maintain my integrity and serenity. Finally, for this first part of my journey, I began to notice that silence encourages reflection and clarity. When I paused instead of responding immediately, I had time to think, to understand my own feelings, and to choose the response, if any, that aligned with my values. In many cases, I realized that no response was needed at all. By stepping back, I could see the bigger picture, recognize patterns, and respond in a way that was constructive rather than reactive. This ability to pause and reflect became one of the most liberating practices of my later years. These first steps, noticing the moments to remain silent, distinguishing when to respond, preserving emotional energy, using silence as a boundary, and allowing reflection, laid the foundation for a new way of living. I started to experience conversations differently, feeling calmer, more in control, and more at peace. Choosing silence didn't make me invisible, it made me intentional. It allowed me to direct my energy toward what truly mattered, rather than wasting it on endless debates, misunderstandings, or conflicts that could not be resolved in the heat of the moment. Now that we've explored these initial insights, the next steps involve practical ways to integrate silence into daily life, the mindset shifts that support it, and how this practice has transformed my relationships and sense of inner peace. And feel that these insights are meaningful. Please type number 2 in the comments to let me know you're still with me. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I warmly invite you to do so, and don't forget to turn on the bell, so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos designed to uplift, inform, and inspire. Your support truly means a lot. It's what keeps us going and allows us to continue sharing thoughtful, helpful content just for you. Now, let's continue this journey together. Once I began practicing silence intentionally, I noticed a profound shift in how I experienced daily interactions. But embracing silence isn't as simple as deciding one day to stop speaking. It requires patience, awareness, and some practical strategies. One of the first techniques I adopted was taking a pause before responding. Whenever someone said something provocative or challenging, I made it a habit to breathe, count to 3, and ask myself, do I really need to respond right now? This short pause, just a few seconds, felt almost revolutionary. It gave me the chance to evaluate whether my response would be constructive, necessary, or simply fueled by emotion. Over time, those few seconds became enough to prevent arguments, misunderstandings, and unnecessary stress. Another important step was observing the difference between productive and unproductive conversations. I realized that some discussions have the potential to reach understanding, while others are driven purely by ego, frustration, or the need to be right. By recognizing these patterns, I could consciously decide when to engage and when to remain silent. For example, in family debates where everyone is emotionally charged, I discovered that my voice often wasn't adding clarity, it was adding noise. Choosing silence in these moments allowed tensions to settle naturally, and sometimes the other people involved would reach a better understanding on their own. I began to see silence as an active choice, not a passive retreat. A third insight came from noticing how silence allows us to listen more deeply. When we're busy defending ourselves or planning our next words, we miss half of what is actually being communicated. By remaining quiet, I could hear not only the words but the emotions behind them. This deeper listening made my interactions more meaningful and often softened conflicts before they even escalated. I found that people felt heard and understood simply because I gave them space to express themselves without interruption. That, in turn, fostered mutual respect and sometimes even changed the tone of the conversation entirely. I also discovered the power of choosing where to invest my energy. Life after 70 brings new priorities, health, family, personal fulfillment, and we quickly learn that our time and energy are finite. Engaging in pointless arguments or trying to correct every misconception was draining. Silence became a way of preserving my energy for the things that mattered most. It allowed me to focus on listening to friends, enjoying quiet moments, engaging in hobbies, or simply being present without the constant mental chatter of debate. In essence, silence became a tool for self-care. Another layer of this practice was learning to recognize the emotional triggers that prompt unnecessary reactions. I began to notice patterns. Certain topics, people, or situations would almost always push my buttons. Instead of reacting immediately, I started labeling the feeling internally. This is anger, or this is fear of being misunderstood. Simply acknowledging the emotion without acting on it created space for calm reflection. I realized that my silence didn't mean I was ignoring the situation, it meant I was choosing how to respond with wisdom rather than impulse. Over time, this practice reduced stress and created a stronger sense of inner peace. A particularly surprising benefit of silence was how it influenced my relationships. People often expect immediate responses, and there's a cultural bias toward speaking as a sign of engagement. But when I practiced silence thoughtfully, I noticed that my presence became more powerful. Conversations slowed down naturally, misunderstandings decreased, and even disagreements felt less confrontational. Friends and family began to notice that I was more patient, more present, and less reactive. Silence, in this sense, became a subtle form of influence, one that encouraged others to speak thoughtfully, listen more carefully, and respect the emotional space around them. Finally, I realized that silence is not about isolation, it's about intentional presence. Choosing to pause, to breathe, or to simply observe does not mean disconnecting from the world. In fact, it often allows us to connect more deeply with ourselves, with others, and with life itself. It creates a moment of reflection, clarity, and awareness. When I sit quietly, even for a few minutes, I can feel the benefits immediately. My mind slows down, my body relaxes, and I am better able to respond with calmness and wisdom rather than reactionary emotion. These practices, pausing before responding, distinguishing productive conversations, listening deeply, preserving energy, observing emotional triggers, noticing the effect on relationships, and embracing intentional presence, became the building blocks of a new way of living. Silence transformed from a simple absence of words into a conscious, powerful choice that shaped my interactions, my mindset, and ultimately, my sense of peace. And as I began to integrate these habits into everyday life, I started noticing even deeper lessons about patience, acceptance, and the wisdom that comes with age, which ultimately led to profound changes in how I see myself and the world around me. As I continued to practice silence, I began to see its effect on my own inner world. One of the most profound lessons I learned is that silence cultivates patience and perspective. When we don't feel compelled to respond immediately, we allow situations to unfold naturally. Problems that seemed urgent suddenly appear less daunting, and misunderstandings that might have escalated dissipate on their own. I discovered that life rarely requires instant answers, and that the space between stimulus and response is where true wisdom resides. At 78, I finally understood that many of the conflicts and frustrations I carried for years could have been diffused simply by pausing and observing, rather than reacting. Another lesson was the value of accepting what cannot be changed. Over decades, I had invested energy in trying to control people, circumstances, and outcomes, often with little success. Silence taught me that sometimes the most effective response is to let go. Letting go doesn't mean giving up or being passive, it means recognizing the limits of our influence and redirecting our energy to what we can truly affect, our own thoughts, behaviors, and choices. This acceptance brought an unexpected calmness, a feeling that life is manageable even when we cannot dictate every detail. Silence also became a tool for emotional regulation and self-respect. By choosing when to speak, I learned to preserve my dignity and avoid saying things in the heat of emotion that I would later regret. It allowed me to stand firm without confrontation, to hold my ground without aggression, and to assert boundaries gently but decisively. Over time, this practice strengthened my sense of self and my confidence, because I realized that I don't always need words to convey strength or wisdom. My calm presence often speaks louder than any argument. One of the most surprising transformations was how silence deepened my relationships. People around me began to notice a change. I was calmer, more present, and more attentive. Conversations became more meaningful because I listened without immediately preparing my next response. Even disagreements felt less stressful because I wasn't fueling them with reactive energy. Silence created a space where understanding could flourish, and I found that others responded with greater thoughtfulness and respect. It's almost as if by stepping back, I gave them permission to step forward in a more authentic way. I also realized that silence allows for greater self-reflection and personal growth. When the mind isn't constantly racing with defensive thoughts or commentary, it becomes easier to examine our own emotions and patterns. I began to notice what truly matters to me, what triggers me unnecessarily, and where I could cultivate more patience and compassion for myself and for others. This kind of reflection is a gift that comes with age, but only if we slow down enough to notice it. Silence, in this sense, becomes a doorway to understanding ourselves more deeply. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that silence can be liberating. For years, I carried the belief that staying quiet meant losing my voice or my power. But in reality, choosing silence is one of the strongest ways to reclaim it. It allows us to pick our battles, speak when it matters most, and let go of the need to constantly justify or defend ourselves. It teaches us that peace of mind and inner freedom are far more valuable than winning an argument or proving a point. And as I embraced this approach, I began to feel lighter, more at ease, and more connected to the people and the world around me. As I share these lessons with you, I want to reassure you that it's never too late to start practicing silence intentionally. Whether you are 60, 70, or beyond, you can begin by simply noticing when your mind urges you to react and pausing instead. Observe your emotions without judgment, take a deep breath, and decide whether a response is truly necessary. Each small moment of conscious silence builds a habit that strengthens your peace, your patience, and your clarity. It's not about giving up your voice, it's about using it wisely and sparingly, in ways that truly matter. I encourage you to reflect on your own life and see where silence might serve you. Maybe it's during family discussions, social media debates, or everyday disagreements. Maybe it's a moment to pause before answering a critical email or a casual comment that could trigger frustration. These small choices can transform the way you experience each day, making interactions calmer, more meaningful, and more fulfilling. And if you're willing to try, I promise that the benefits extend far beyond your relationships. They reach into your own mind and heart, creating a serenity that words alone cannot achieve. If this story resonates with you, I invite you to share your experiences or thoughts in the comments. How have you used silence in your own life? What differences have you noticed when you pause instead of reacting? Sharing your perspective can inspire someone else to find the same calm and wisdom that comes from this simple but powerful practice. And if you found this video helpful, please like it and subscribe to the channel for more guidance on living peacefully and intentionally at any age. Here's the final takeaway: silence is not emptiness, it is presence, strength, and wisdom. By choosing when to speak and when to pause, we can protect our peace, deepen our relationships, and gain clarity about ourselves. At 78, I have discovered that silence is one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves, a gift that grows richer with experience and patience. So let us embrace it, not as a retreat, but as a powerful, mindful, and transformative way to live.